From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew.
The text is out. Speaker Mike Johnson making good on his promise to release separate bills to fund Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, with his job on the line. We'll have the latest from Capitol Hill in a conversation with Democratic Congressman Adam Smith of Washington this hour.
Money for Ukraine in the balance as ammunition and morale run low. We'll talk about the impact on the battlefield with retired General Wesley Clark, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander in Europe.
And Donald Trump discussing support for Ukraine today with Poland's president as Joe Biden talks steel tariffs in Pennsylvania. We'll have more from the campaign trail. But, Joe, of course, we have to begin this evening with the fact that we finally have it in hand.
Yep.
Speaker Johnson sticking with his plan to address aid for U.S. allies in individual bills. The text is out. We are still awaiting text on a fourth package, though, that could include a TikTok divestiture.
Yes, indeed.
Repo and some other matters.
Well, that's absolutely right. And this is following, of course, a lot of reporting that he was facing a lot of criticism, holding a lot of meetings with members of his Republican conference that didn't love this idea. But you're right. We've got 3 bills out so far, 1 to follow, and apparently a vote on Saturday. A lot of questions about what happens in the Senate. We talked earlier today with Republican Congressman Kelly Armstrong here on Balance of Power. Here's what he had to say.
The problem with how our rule votes have gone so far this Congress is it's a little bit like skipping school. It's hardest the first time, gets a little easier the second time, and now we're there. But I mean, we'll get our first answer in the Rules Committee, and then we'll see when we get on the floor.
We're joined now by a member from the other side of the aisle, Congressman Adam Smith, the Democrat from Washington and ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee, joining us live this evening on Bloomberg TV and radio from Capitol Hill. Congressman, thank you so much for your time. You have now seen the text, as have we. Are all of these measures going to earn your vote? Do you expect them all to pass?
I do, and yes, I will vote for them. I certainly vote for the first 3, which is basically the Senate bill just split into 3 parts, supporting Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. We haven't actually, as you noted, seen the text of the 4th bill. I have been told what is in it. I am inclined to be supportive of that as well, but I'll have to see the text. And yes, it's a difficult process, but I do expect all of these bills to pass, and then they will be merged together when they go over to the Senate, so the Senate will consider all 4 as one.
Just trying to figure out the process here, Congressman, because there was a bill that passed the Senate that included emergency funding for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, the Indo-Pac region, almost to the dollar that we have here. It also included an important border compromise that I know a lot of your colleagues worked for months on here. Now that we're doing this with a Republican-led House, it has everything but the border compromise. So
yeah, one
is this
slight correction there.
A better bill for Democrats? What's the correction?
Yeah, the border portion did not pass the Senate. There was a border portion that was attached to the bill that Leader Schumer brought up that the Republicans voted down, and then they removed the border portions. The bill that passed the Senate had Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. It did not have the border provisions. So look, it's a convoluted process. I will grant you that. And it's convoluted because Speaker Johnson was trying to, well, as I like to say, appease the unappeasable. He was trying to appease the MAGA portion of his caucus that didn't want anything on Ukraine. So he insisted on splitting the vote. It would have been vastly easier if we had just taken up the Senate bill and passed it. But this is what the Speaker said he had to have to bring this up. So he has it. He's brought it up. Now we'll go forward.
Well, and there's a question, sir, now that the Speaker has made his choice, about what choice the Democrats may make if, as a result of his choice, he actually is faced with a motion to vacate, and there are multiple Republicans who could potentially vote to oust him as House Speaker. A moment ago, we heard from your leader, Hakeem Jeffries, saying that Johnson has not asked for help from Democrats. If he hasn't asked for it, is he likely to receive it? What are you hearing from your leadership?
Yes, he is likely to receive it. I, for one, will not vote to remove Speaker Johnson. And I know a number of other Democrats feel the same way that I do. There's kind of this coy little thing back and forth as to whether or not we say that publicly. I tend to be more blunt and straightforward than most members, so I'm not going to be coy about it. It doesn't serve the interests of Congress or the country to remove the Speaker at this point, and he's carried through with his pledge to not abandon Ukraine, to give us a vote on Ukraine. And as long as he's done that, I'm certainly not going to agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene about who the Speaker of the House should be.
So how many Adam Smiths are there on the Democratic side of the aisle, Congressman? Because we keep hearing that there might be an arrangement for some of you to stay home that would offset the numbers that I presume Tom Emmer is gathering right now as majority whip. Are there enough Democrats to overcome opposition on the right?
Yeah, I don't know for sure, but I'm very confident that the answer to that question is yes. I don't think any of us are going to be staying home. I think we're going to vote. We're going to vote not to vacate the Speaker, not to follow the lead of Marjorie Taylor Greene and the MAGA Republicans.
So, sir, if you will vote that way, there, of course, is the question of how the votes will unfold going forward, as you were alluding to the idea that you do need to see what is in the fourth bill, the actual text. But we know the ideas of things that may be included, including repo, taking seized Russian assets, using that to fund Ukraine's war effort. That's something we spoke about yesterday with one of your Republican colleagues, French Hill of Arkansas. And this is what he had to say. We'll have you respond.
We're not tying the president's hands. We're giving the president flexibility in using Russian sovereign assets that have already been frozen. We're going to put those in an account, and that account can be used for the benefit of Ukraine, working with Ukraine and other financial partners in Europe. This is a more flexibility for the president, not limited.
Congressman, do you in principle support this idea? And is it as likely to work in reality as it is potentially to work in theory?
Well, I think it'll work in reality. I am troubled by it. It'll work in the sense that we'll go ahead and grab a relatively small amount of money. I think the figure I saw was $5 billion that U.S. banks have control over. Most of this is in European banks. I'm troubled by the idea because, look, the global banking system is dependent upon a certain amount of trust. Now, we've frozen those assets because of concerns about Russia, what Russia has done in Ukraine, obviously. But if we undermine the trust that people have in the global banking system, that's a delicate balance. So I'm kind of undecided on that one individual idea for those reasons. I'm worried about the impact, even though I recognize the benefit of being able to take that money and give it to Ukraine.
Congressman, just to get back to something we were talking about here, and that's the future of the Speaker. Are we going to be having a conversation at some point in the next couple of days about a power sharing agreement? Is there something that Democrats need to act to protect Mike Johnson? Or were you actually speaking out of principle in the hopes of maintaining some sort of order in the House of Representatives?
In a shocking development, I was actually speaking out of principle. I'm not looking for a deal here. Speaker Johnson has kept the government open. He put the appropriations bills on the floor, let us vote on them, kept funding the government. He's now given us a vote on helping Ukraine and Israel and Taiwan. I mean, look, I do not expect that the Republican Speaker of the House is going to agree with me on too many issues, all right? Yeah. But I'm not going to blow the place up as long as he's running it reasonably effectively and efficiently, and he's working with us. He has shown an ability to work with Democrats in the House, with Democrats and Republicans in the Senate, and with the White House. And look, I think that's what you have to expect. A democracy doesn't mean that you get what you want all the time. You have to have some respect for the institution in order to make sure it continues to function regardless of who's in charge. So it's a basic principle. I don't think Mike Johnson has done anything that warrants his removal.
Members of the Freedom Caucus are cringing as they hear you speak right now, Congressman. Don't you think that would weaken a Republican speaker to be saved by Democrats?
Well, look, I mean, I don't know that he's like, well, the honest answer to your question is, yeah, it doesn't help him. But look, the people who are going to consider that a weakening event, they're not on his side anyway. I mean, they were upset when he kept the government open. You know, on a couple of occasions. They were upset when he put the appropriations bills on the floor. I don't think it's going to weaken him with the people who already support him. And the ones who don't. Okay, and they won't. I mean, what they want is they want to shut down the government unless they get absolutely everything that they want. They don't believe fundamentally in democracy. They don't believe the Democrats who got elected or the Democrats who control the Senate or the Democrat in the White House should have any say in governing. And they're wrong about that. So I think Speaker Johnson is taking the right position, and those who view that as weakness fundamentally don't support democracy.
Of course, part of democracy, sir, is doing the actual legislating. There's a lot more that goes on Capitol Hill, though, including holding hearings and trying to get to the bottom of certain issues. And I want to get your take, knowing that you do join us as a representative from the state of Washington, where Boeing has a rather large presence. There was a whistleblower testifying in the Senate today around Boeing's safety culture. Are you concerned, Congressman, about what is happening at Boeing or the impact inquiries into this could have ultimately on the fate and trajectory of that company? Do you expect that a legislative effort could actually be produced here that will affect it in some way?
Yeah, I'm really concerned about it. Look, I mean, I grew up in the city of SeaTac, and when I grew up, I used to joke I thought everybody's father worked for Boeing. Boeing has been a part of my life literally from the day I was born. A very respected company that has really gone through some troubles recently. I think they've made some bad decisions. They have not led the company the way they should, and they should be held accountable for it, and we should work to make sure that they fix that and improve that. The company is not producing the product that they should be producing right now, and I think that is a legitimate concern for everybody. Particularly, I would say, people from my neighborhood. That the 737 is made in my district. I have enormous respect for the workers there. They deserve to be better treated by the company, and we deserve to get a better product. And yes, Congress clearly has a role in taking steps to make sure that happens.
Congressman, it's great to have you with us today. We appreciate the time. Congressman Adam Smith preparing to do some voting in the near term. Coming up, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas' impeachment dies a quick death in the Senate. We'll have an update coming up next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It is different than the Senate's bill. For the Ukraine piece, for example, we've introduced the loan concept, the Repo Act, so any funding that goes to support the government of Ukraine is converted to a loan. We introduced the Repo Act, which is the seizure, as you know, of corrupt Russian oligarchs' assets. And that could be used to fund the resistance in Ukraine as well. We have sanctions for Iran and Russia and China, the aggressors who are causing all this problem, the new axis of evil. We have a lot of new changes in here. We have accountability and a strategy shift as well.
The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, just moments ago, after today releasing separate bills to fund Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, speaking to some of the elements in this package. They're joining us now at the table. Bloomberg's Mike Dorning. It's good to see you, Mike, as we try to figure out the way forward here. You can argue that he made it easier by giving lawmakers some options here. You can vote against Israel, for instance, or for Ukraine, or vice versa, and somehow get this all together. What happens in the end? Assuming this goes as planned, and that has yet to be seen, how is this all stitched together in a form that will be palatable to the Senate?
So they'll do 4 separate bills, but they'll all just automatically stitch together at the end. And the way they'll do it is, the progressive Democrats who want conditions put on the Israel aid and are upset about treatment of Palestinians in Gaza can vote against that. And the ultra-conservatives who don't like the Ukraine aid can vote against that. And then at the end, they'll just stitch it all together and send it over to the Senate. And they're doing a few things, as you just saw the Speaker mention, to try to make it a little more palatable on the edges, make the economic assistance to Ukraine a loan, like if they ever get better, they could maybe pay it back, and seize some Russian assets. Most of those assets, as your prior guest mentioned, are over in Europe and not the U.S., but there's still some in the U.S., and you can seize some in the U.S. and defray some of the cost.
Of course, we also just discussed with Congressman Smith this idea that there could very well be a motion to vacate that is actually acted on by Marjorie Taylor Greene ahead of us in the not-so-distant future. He says he would cast a vote to protect Mike Johnson. He thinks a number of other Democrats would be with him. I guess my question is, even if he's saved by Democrats once, what's to stop this from happening again and again and again? And will Democrats continue to show up for a Republican speaker when Ukraine aid is no longer on the line?
Well, also, the Marjorie Taylor Greene and the conservatives can basically cripple him even without taking him out as speaker by just stopping these things called rules, which are the way that basically any legislation has to be considered in the House. Mm-hmm. Democrats might say, hey, we'll vote for you to be speaker, but they're not necessarily going to vote for the so-called rule that allows Congress to consider all these pieces of Republican legislation, and then the dissidents can keep kneecapping the speaker all the way along. So it certainly would create a weak situation for the speaker, but there does seem to be Democratic sentiment, if he proceeds with this plan to fund Ukraine, to at least back him on not throwing him out, not deposing him, for now.
For now. All right.
Yes.
Bloomberg's Mike Dorning, who helps lead our congressional coverage. Thank you so much. Now, in the meantime, the democratically controlled Senate killed the impeachment of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas today. Joining us now for more is Bloomberg's Texas bureau chief, Julie Fine, who deals with the issue of the border up close and personal every single day. And Julie, of course, we heard from the Republicans in the House who had impeached Mayorkas in the first place that he was in dereliction of duty in enforcing the Biden administration's policies at the border. How is this death of the impeachment likely to go down in border states where this is such an issue?
Well, I think the death of the impeachment is not going to be a surprise in border states. I mean, clearly in border states, there are many that wanted to see this happen and wanted to see this trial in the Senate. But it's like going to a play where you know the ending, like you knew it wasn't going anywhere in the Senate. So while I think it was something that border states are very concerned about, they knew ultimately this impeachment trial was likely not to happen.
Well, of course, the border issue is such a big one, Julie, on the campaign trail. We've talked about this a lot, depending on where you are. It's the number one issue, and it was certainly in the air in Pittsburgh today, where President Biden was calling for higher tariffs, geopolitics playing into this, higher tariffs specifically on Chinese steel and aluminum, all part of his pitch to union workers in the swing state. I want to get your take on the contrast we're seeing now on the campaign trail after we hear from Joe Biden. Here he is.
The backbone of America has a steel spine. It really does have a steel spine. U.S. Steel has been an iconic American company for more than a century, and it should remain a totally American company. American owned, American operated by American union steelworkers, the best in the world, and that's going to happen, I promise you.
Now, Julie, he's talking to union rank and file there. There was the steelworkers today, many of whom, as we saw, are gravitating toward Donald Trump's message. If Joe Biden can pursue or actually close the deal on executive action on the border, will he win more of them over?
I think in terms of some of the steel workers, I think it will certainly get their attention. And this is something you are going to see frequently on the campaign trail, especially in states like Pennsylvania, which are critical to President Biden and where you'll see him spending a lot of time courting that union vote, which is absolutely critical to him. And being strong on this issue on the border is a win for him, where he needs one when it comes to immigration, where many people feel he's just not strong enough on that issue.
Mm-hmm. All right, Julie, thanks for being with us. As always, Julie Fine, our Texas bureau chief, with us on Balance of Power. Coming up, Congress puts the pressure on Boeing. Our Tyler Kendall speaks with the lawmakers leading a series of investigations into the company from Capitol Hill. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines in Washington, where lawmakers heighten their scrutiny of Boeing today, holding two hearings examining safety procedures at the company. This coming after a recent incident, of course, in which a 737 MAX 9 saw a door plug blow off during an Alaska Airlines flight. If you're watching us on Bloomberg TV, you see the remnants of that incident. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall has been talking with the lawmakers leading the investigations, spending the day on Capitol Hill and joining us now from the Hill. Tyler?
Yeah, hey, Joe, these dual hearings today really highlighted the heightened scrutiny that lawmakers are putting on Boeing after these recent mishaps. The first hearing today featured a panel of aviation safety experts. They were testifying about this report commissioned by Congress that raised some questions about Boeing's safety and reporting culture. Interestingly enough, a lot of the lawmakers are pinning the blame on Boeing, but they also didn't let Boeing's regulator, the FAA, off the hook here, asking how these sorts of incidents happened under their watch, including what they are calling tough conditions for whistleblowers to come forward. That leads us to the second hearing that happened today. That actually did feature a Boeing whistleblower who testified to Congress saying that they feel that Boeing has a culture that is prioritizing speed in production over safety. His name is Sam Salapur. He testified to lawmakers today accusing Boeing of essentially taking shortcuts in production of some of its largest aircrafts, including the 787 Dreamliner. I want you to take a listen to some of his testimony today.
I told my boss that I said in the report, I said, we have made 300 plus airplanes. That should have been more than adequate for us to resolve these things. All the problems that we've had, we put Band-Aid over Band-Aid to resolve the problems, and Band-Aid over Band-Aid doesn't cover it. Maybe we need to consider some engineering fundamentals.
Yes.
Now, of course, Joe and Kaylee, it's important to note that Boeing denies these claims and that they didn't appear at either of these hearings today, despite being invited to testify. Now, I did have the chance to catch up with one of the top lawmakers leading one of these investigations. He tells me that Boeing is fully cooperating here and that they are working on a date in the near future to get outgoing Boeing CEO David Calhoun to the Hill.
And Tyler, just quickly in our final minute.
I'd like to have them come at some point in time and talk about what types of maintenance programs they have in place to be pretty much the last line in terms of quality control to assure passenger safety. Certainly want to find out at some point in time what Boeing is doing to address this, but also what the airlines do to provide comfort to the traveling public.
So, Joe and Kaylee, that there was Senator Ron Johnson, a Republican from Wisconsin. He is the ranking member on that Senate panel today that heard testimony from that whistleblower. I was talking to him about what's going to happen next year. Like I mentioned, we're potentially going to hear from David Calhoun, the outgoing Boeing CEO. But also, Ron Johnson says that he wants to hear from the airlines, too, about what they're doing to ensure passenger safety.
All right, a lot still to look forward to. Great reporting. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall on the Hill tonight. Thank you so much. Now, coming up, we're going to turn back to geopolitics. We'll be joined by General Wesley Clark, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It is late, but it's not too late. It is sooner than it could have been. The equipment that's going to Ukraine is ready to ship. It's produced in the U.S. The money that we're providing is paying for replenishment of that equipment. In fact, some of that equipment's in Europe. So Ukraine will get relief almost immediately. I was just there 2 weeks ago, and what I saw was Ukraine is able to produce low-cost drones, more advanced drones, tanks, etc., for its use. It's doing that now, but they don't have advanced anti-jamming equipment, and they don't have air cover.
Former Congresswoman Jane Harman, now chair of the National Defense Strategy Commission, talking with us earlier today, with now 3 spending bills released by the Republican-led House, one of them for Ukraine, with more than $60 billion, not unlike the original request posed by President Biden. But, of course, months have passed since that request was made. And joining us now is retired General Wesley Clark, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. General, it's great to see you. Welcome back. As we heard from Jane Harman, some think it is not too late. As I read this morning, though, in a column in Politico, Ukraine is heading for defeat, is the headline. The West's failure to send weapons to Kyiv is helping Putin win his war. We're hearing stories of low morale, troops who've been waiting in the field for a month without a shell to fire. What will Ukraine have to do to make this funding and this round of support, assuming it passes, work for them against Russia?
Well, we've got to get it there. That's the most important thing. If you pass the bill today, most of that stuff cannot be easily airlifted right to the battlefield. It's got to be shipped. Some of it goes by plane. Some of it may go by ship. It goes to Poland. It gets driven in. They need it desperately right now. And Ukraine's fighting hard. You can't take anything away from them. They just don't have the means to defend themselves. You know, they looked at what we did with our allies to protect Israel, and they're asking themselves, why can't? I mean, here's Ukraine. We didn't attack Russia. They attacked us unprovoked. And can't we get a little bit more help and support from our friends and fellow democracies in the West who say they believe in? We're fighting for what you stand for. It's a tragic situation. We've got to get that aid in there as rapidly as possible.
Well, General, as you speak to this idea, though, that there will be somewhat of a lagged effect of the aid actually passing and then arriving in Ukraine, is that something that Russia would be able to take advantage of? If Putin knows more help is coming, what is he likely to do in the interim period between when the help says it's coming and when the help actually arrives?
Going to do everything he can to stall when it gets here. That's the first thing. But he's building up his forces. He's making headway. We've lost about 40 kilometers from Bakhmut back to the west. And Putin will attempt, as the season dries out even more, and he gets across some of these river obstacles that are there in front of him, he's going to make a run for it. He's going to try to break through. He's going to go as far west as he can go. Can he get to Kyiv? Probably not. But can he isolate Kharkiv? Definitely. He doesn't want to have to fight in a city. He's cut off the electricity there right now. They have no power, is what I'm told. They have no real air defense left in that area. And so he's going to starve them out and freeze them out or burn them out and whatever he needs. This is a very, very serious situation because it reflects on the credibility of America and it's our security at risk. So when we tell Israel, don't retaliate, we'll take care of you, and they look at how we're taking care of Ukraine, imagine how much confidence they have in us.
General, there was a statement issued by the House Intelligence Committee. It came from Chair Mike Turner, Ranking Member Jim Himes, that got our attention. With specific regard to this conversation, it was calling for the passage of aid to Ukraine. And one line jumped out. Today in a classified briefing, it says, our committee was informed of the critical need to provide Ukraine military aid this week. What were they talking about in such an imminent manner?
I don't know what they could be saying. I mean, look, we've got the need for Ukraine is urgent. It's desperate. It will make a difference. They need Patriot missiles. They need long-range ATACMS, and they need 155 artillery rounds, and they need Western logistics support. And President Macron of France said that we should consider putting some troops in there. He's absolutely right. You have to keep Putin off balance. You can't deter someone if you tell them exactly what the boundaries are. And, so far in dealing with Putin, we've been deterred by Putin. He's been assured that we won't do this, we won't do that, we don't want this, we won't do that. So he's free to operate. What President Macron was saying, which I think makes a lot of sense, is you've got to have some ambiguity in your commitment. He's discussed potentially putting French troops in, for example, to help secure Odessa. This is important steps forward for the West and for Ukraine.
Well, General, it's interesting to hear you say this, as you also are drawing a bit of a contrast to the U.S. support in Israel and in the Middle East, where no line has been drawn to say that there will be no U.S. boots on the ground, which was drawn immediately when Russia first invaded Ukraine, that no U.S. troops would go there. You used to be the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe for NATO, and you don't think we should rule out that eventually NATO troops may actually indeed have to do something tangibly on the ground?
We can't rule that out. From the beginning, we should have taken advantage of Ukraine's airspace. We should never have said to Russia, okay, since you've invaded Ukraine, we're not going to touch Ukraine and please don't hurt us. Instead, we should have said, you invaded a sovereign country. We respect the international rules-based order. This is their airspace. We're going to continue to fly support and supplies and humanitarian assistance into Kyiv. You mess with us at your own risk. So we should have turned it around on them, and we didn't. And we're still reeling from the effects of this. If we had given Kyiv what they asked for initially, the artillery, the HIMARS, the ATACMS, the F-16s, we wouldn't be in this position today.
Wow, General, we've heard the term World War III thrown around recently with regard to what's happening in the Middle East. You're suggesting the potential for a direct conflict between the United States and Russia. What would that lead to?
What I'm saying is that the post-Cold War is over. It's a new era. You have a group of nations that are lining up increasingly together against us, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. They are willing to use force in ways that no one would have anticipated. Russia in Ukraine, 350 missiles striking at Israel. Nuclear power is now on the table. The threat issued today by Khamenei in Iran, that sounds nuclear to me. It's exactly what Putin was saying to us a couple of years ago in Ukraine. This is a new era. We have to understand that if we're going to fulfill our obligations, preserve peace, maintain American security, the old way of thinking about things of being noble and nice and slow and, gee, I'm sure you didn't mean it and all that, that worked when we were the only superpower, but we're under threat right now and we're being challenged. Putin believes he's at war with us. Mike McCall says Russia's in our political system. There's no doubt about that. And they're affecting policy making in the United States. So we have to just face facts here. It's not that anybody wants a confrontation, but if you keep backing away and backing away and backing away, you are inviting an escalation of violence against us.
All right, General, sobering to hear from you this evening, but we so appreciate your insight. General Wesley Clark, U.S. Army Supreme Allied Commander, formerly in Europe. Thank you. Now, coming up, as we discuss the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, we'll look at what the House may be trying to do to address that as Mike Johnson moves forward with a new package for assistance for Ukraine, a separate one for Israel, and even another for Taiwan. We'll have the details next about the political ramifications with our political panel. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
I have not asked a single Democrat to get involved in that at all. I do not spend time walking around thinking about the motion to vacate. I have a job to do here, and I'm going to do the job. And regardless of personal consequences, that's what we're supposed to do. If Marjorie brings the motion, she brings the motion, and we'll let the chips fall where they may. I have to do what I have to do, and then the members will vote their conscience as well.
That was House Speaker Mike Johnson moments ago on Capitol Hill. And whether or not he's asked for Democratic support, at least one Democrat says he's got it. Here's Congressman Adam Smith speaking with us earlier this hour.
I, for one, will not vote to remove Speaker Johnson. And I know a number of other Democrats feel the same way that I do. There's kind of this coy little thing back and forth as to whether or not we say that publicly. I tend to be more blunt and straightforward than most members, so I'm not going to be coy about it. It doesn't serve the interests of Congress or the country to remove the speaker at this point, and he's carried through with his pledge to not abandon Ukraine, to give us a vote on Ukraine. And as long as he's done that, I'm certainly not going to agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene about who the Speaker of the House should be.
Joining us now for more is our political panel, Jesse Hunt, Monadnock founder and president, and Stephanie Murphy, the former Democratic congresswoman from Florida. So thank you both so much for being here this evening. Congresswoman, as a Democrat, I have to turn to you first. Is this wise politics for Democrats to save a Republican speaker, or has he really given them enough here?
I think it's an interesting thing, and it's always great to hear from my former chairman of the Armed Services Committee when I was serving there, Smith. He is very direct and very blunt, and there are a lot of ways where Democrats can help in a motion to vacate that doesn't include voting up or down. I mean, they can vote present or just not be at the vote. So I guess there are a lot of options for them. But what I think is more important about this whole conversation, the motion to vacate, indicate is what it says about Republicans' party's values right now. The extreme elements of the Republican Party have punished their leadership, one for saving the U.S. economy from the debt ceiling crisis and working with Democrats in that manner, and then now with reinforcing our national security. Those are pretty out of line with the American people values, and it's really dangerous for them politically as they go into this election year.
Well, Jesse, welcome to the table. Apparently we're being blunt, so let's do that now. What happens to Mike Johnson, the perception of Mike Johnson as a Republican leader, if it requires Democrats to save his job? Is he as good as finished in the eyes of Republicans? Is it time for a power-sharing deal? We go all in and be one big happy family with Hakeem Jeffries?
I don't think anyone would question Speaker Johnson's conservative credentials, not here in Washington, D.C., and not back home in his district. I think what you're seeing right now is politics guide policy. We have a little bit more than 6 months until the election, and ultimately it's his job to make sure that the members who are going to help decide the majority in these tough races are in a good position back home. And House Republicans need to govern. That's why people elected them. That's the expectation. This constant chaos is only helping Democrats further their goals at taking back the House. There is no Republican speaker if we continue down this path of constantly undercutting the speaker, who's looking out for these members like a Mike Lawler, like a Don Bacon, who are going to have to go home in November and ask their constituents to give them another 2 years. Those are the people who decide majorities. And so that's the challenge right now, and I think the speaker is doing a good job trying to navigate that. Obviously, some of the more conservative members, I guess the hardliners, as you would call them, or folks with the loudest voice right now, they don't have those same consequences back home. They aren't as vital to our outcome in November.
Well, it's interesting, Jesse, to hear you talk about Johnson's conservative credentials, because it's worth keeping in mind 6 months ago when Kevin McCarthy was ousted, he was the only one who was able to get enough support from those hardline conservatives and all of the other moderates. Emmer couldn't do it. Jordan couldn't do it. Scalise couldn't do it. If it's not Johnson, would anybody be able to replicate his feat of being able to secure the votes to get the gavel if he is ousted?
I don't believe so. That's the more frustrating part. I think that's where you're seeing a lot of members speak out. You're seeing a lot of prominent conservative voices in the party speak out and say, like, okay, what's next? What's the alternative? And no one's really produced an alternative. It's like Goldilocks to the 10th degree. You're not able to actually find the sweet spot here, because I guess what's the actual ask here? What the speaker's trying to do and what a lot of members are trying to do is ultimately govern. Chaos, when we are running the House of Representatives, does nothing to help folks at the ballot box in November.
Congresswoman, we just spent some time talking to General Wesley Clark about the image that we're projecting abroad as the world watches this debate here in Washington. With your background in national security and, of course, as a lawmaker, can you help us understand the statement that the House is about to make here, the House of Representatives, when it comes to standing by our allies?
Well, let's hope that they get it across the finish line, but it took them much too long to act. It took 2 months.
Well, that would in itself be a statement if they did not get it across the finish line, wouldn't it?
Right. But it took 2 months from when the Senate sent this bill to the House with overwhelming bipartisan support. I think it was like 72 votes aye in the Senate. And that's a huge bipartisan vote when it comes to the Senate. And for the House, it only took 300 plus drones and some missiles coming in at Israel to underscore to the House Republicans how important it was to move on these national security bills. And so, I think the world is starting to get a little accustomed to kind of the chaos that the House Republican-led Congress brings forward. But, let's just hope we do the right thing in this moment.
Coming up, President Biden proposing higher tariffs against China as he courts to U.S. unions in swing state Pennsylvania, a 3-day tour. Our panel stays with us for their take on the campaign trail coming up next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Trade Representative is investigating trade practices by the Chinese government regarding steel and aluminum. If that investigation confirms these anti-competitive trade practices, then I'm calling on her to consider tripling the tariff rates for both steel imports and aluminum imports from China.
That was President Biden. If you're not able to watch us on Bloomberg TV, not Donald Trump, talking about tripling tariffs earlier in Pittsburgh today. The message on a three-day swing through the swing state. Back with us is our political panel. Jesse Hunt, Monadnock founder and president, alongside Stephanie Murphy, former Democratic Congresswoman from Florida. It's great to have both of you with us. Jesse, what do you think about this? In Pittsburgh, it's not all that far, as a matter of fact, from the Monadnock region, certainly when it comes to mindset, when you think of Republican-leaning, conservative-leaning independents or maybe centrist Democrats who the president is trying to speak to now who might otherwise be voting for Donald Trump. We're going to have, I guess, this populist war on the economy now as well. Is that the right message?
Look, he obviously has a lot to overcome. The Wall Street Journal recently put out a poll that showed Biden trailing in 6 out of 7 swing states. A lot of that is due in part to his weak standing among your working class rural voters. I think it's deeply... I think it affects Joe Biden pretty profoundly because he fancies himself Scranton Joe, somebody who appeals to this type of voter. Yet, I think broadly speaking, they've been upset with the Democrats' message writ large. Some of the stuff on the cultural front. So obviously he's trying to claw back some of that support. But we've seen with Donald Trump on the ballot, he's the working class warrior. He's somebody who really speaks to a lot of those voters' concerns. I think this is going to be an uphill battle for Joe Biden, and I think it's bared out in the polling that we've seen over the last couple of weeks or even the last couple of months. So, he can go out and do a campaign event today. I don't think it's going to turn it around, but it's going to be the continued conversation over the next 6 months.
Well, Congresswoman, as we think about the contrast or not between Joe Biden and Donald Trump on some of these particular issues, sure, Trump is out there floating perhaps a 60% tariff on everything coming from China. But at the end of the day, both of these individuals are pursuing protectionist policies, right? There are areas in which we see things that they have in common.
When I was a member of Congress, I sat on the Ways and Means Committee, which had jurisdiction over trade. And I often said that trade had become a 4-letter word in Washington. And it's really unfortunate that it's being bantied about in that way, because I don't think it's the politics, the populist politics, the anti-trade politics aren't pushing forward a pro-growth economy for the United States. And you can be sure that if President Biden does enforce some additional tariffs, that the Chinese will return. And they'll return fire. And in a political election year, they're going to return fire strategically on certain sectors that will hurt and possibly use it as a way to influence our elections this year. So just like in kinetic wars, trade wars, no shot goes unanswered.
Well, this was a day out of court for Donald Trump. And he spent some time speaking with the president of Poland, President Duda, who actually spoke with us here recently on Balance of Power about his relationship with the former president. Congresswoman, let's listen to what he said, and we'll have you respond.
I had a good cooperation with President Donald Trump. I already communicated that in interviews. If we had an agreement about something with President Donald Trump, that agreement was always kept. I was pleased insofar as whenever we talked, I saw that he was able to understand the problems in our part of Europe, and I can say that with full responsibility.
Congresswoman, is it appropriate for foreign leaders to be meeting with the presumptive nominee as opposed to the President of the United States?
I think we've had situations in the past where foreign leaders have taken a position or a stand on the elections of the United States. But at the end of the day, it's American voters and the American people who get to decide their leadership. I've been hearing stuff out of the Trump campaign, and I'm wondering if they're trying to create for themselves a Reagan moment. Reagan also engaged during his campaign on the hostage situation. And, so it will be interesting to see how much further he goes with this.
All right, Stephanie Murphy and Jesse Hunt, thank you both so much for joining us this evening. We appreciate it. Of course, Donald Trump will be back in court in New York tomorrow. For more coverage of that and everything else, check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online.
We'll see if they can finish jury selection. They'll be back at it tomorrow.
Yep.
We'll meet you then Speaking of tomorrow, thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Bloomberg.